I think we're going to give people a couple of minutes to get in. But in the meantime, I guess we should introduce ourselves. Okay, wait. Do they have the same layout as us, Rosalind? So like you're...
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Why don't we start with you and we'll just go like a book.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Rosalind. I am based out of Columbus, Ohio, a very Midwestern girl. And I write middle grade mysteries. My debut novel comes out now spring 2025, which we can get into that later. Now spring 2025, and it's a middle grade mystery called Smoke and Mirrors with Abrams.
That's so cool. God, I can't wait to talk submission. Okay. I'm Taylor. I write young adult and adult horror. I live in Connecticut with my cats and my kids and my partner. My debut novel comes out with Peachtree Teen in fall 2025. It's a YA horror called Hollow. Welcome.
Eunice. Okay. Hi, I'm Eunice. I'm out on Long Island, New York. I am mentoring for adult and YA SFF, but I also write contemporary women's fiction and contemporary YA. I'm currently out on submission for an upmarket women's fiction novel, and yeah, that's where I'm at.
Is that me? I'm on the next line. Hi, everyone. I'm in California. My name is Marisa, and what I write and what I'm mentoring, there's some overlap. So I'm mentoring YA contemporary, and I see Nicole is here, so shout out to my mentee, Nicole. But what I write is everything from middle grade on up, including adult, which always sounds weird to me, like it's like triple X rated or something. But writing for adults and kids, and I am currently on submission with a middle grade magical realism. So hopefully somebody will be reading that soon, and hopefully I'll sell that. And I'm excited to be here.
Everyone, I'm Marina. I'm based in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and I primarily write adult fantasy, usually like romantasy, I guess, but I also dabble in young adult and middle grade, just kind of across speculative genres. And I'm currently not allowed to talk about what's going on with submission, but it's exciting. So.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. There we go. My app decided to crash just as I was starting to speak. I'm Hyung, everybody. I am an adult and YA SFF and horror mentor. I also write in these areas. I also write kind of adjacent to literary fiction, which makes my life very hard with submission. I also can't talk about stuff, but hopefully we'll be able to soon. I live in Bloomington, Indiana with my partner, 2 cats and a ton of plants, but I'm from Iowa originally. I've lived in California and the DC metro area, so I've been all over.
Hey everyone, I'm Brigida. I'm based out of Maryland, although I also work for a video game company in San Francisco, so sometimes on West Coast time as well. I primarily write and also illustrate graphic novels and then also picture books, and that's also what I'm mentoring right now. And yeah, super excited to meet all of y'all and talk about books and publishing with you.
We did it. We got through the most awkward part of the thing. So I think we wanted to bring you all in because Roundtable Mentor isn't just about mentorship and mentees, it's about the community we build, especially over the past, I don't know, year that a certain somebody has taken over Twitter. The writing community has kind of fractured. And part of the goal of the program is to create a central space for people to learn how to write, to learn how to edit, to learn how to mentor too. So this is a learning process for us too. You guys are a guinea pig year, like it or not. I hope we're doing an okay job so far. You'll have to let us know. But we have been getting a lot of questions and comments around querying, and we wanted to address that as a mentor pool. Some of us don't have agents. Some of us have sold a book. There's a huge swath of experience and representation here. So we wanted to talk a little bit about our own querying journeys so that you know what to expect if that's something that you're interested in doing. So I'm going to hand this off to Rosalind. Can you tell us about your querying journey? Specify the number of agents you're on, and if you queried pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic, if you saw a difference. I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah. I know. So I'm going to have to think about the pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, because it kind of all blends together in terms of like the querying journey. I think I had like a kind of odd journey because a lot of my querying experience was through Twitter, actually. So I queried one book and didn't get an agent with it. And then I wrote another book, and then I ended up getting agents for my second book. And both books that I queried, the majority of the agents I queried, I actually got through like pitch contests. So I did Pit Mad and then DV Pit were like the two that I did. And the one thing I will say is the first book that I queried, they were both like middle grade mysteries. The first one did much, much better in pitch contests, which all I'm going to say with that is that it really does not matter how well you do in those sorts of things. It is entirely just if your one book connects with the one agent that you end up signing with. That is the only thing that matters. I think the first time I like pitched a book, it was like way more high concept for the first book that I queried. And I was really like shocked with the reception I got. None of the agents liked it. I got rejected by every single one. And I ended up later, I want to say like after probably 3 years of rewriting that book and like going off of the edit letters I got from different agents and stuff, working through it, revise and resubmits, I ended up writing a new book. And that was like right around, I think, lockdown. So I want to say I finished the like kind of like the query ready draft of that a few months into lockdown. I also got laid off from my job. So I had nothing but time to work on this book. And then I ended up, I think, using DV Pit as kind of like, this is when I'm going to get back into the querying trenches with this new book. And I think I got like, I don't know, a handful of likes from that, which compared to my last book, I was kind of like disappointed with. But I think because I had spent so much more time on that book and like making sure that the agents I was going to query with that book matched the actual book I wrote, it went so much quicker that time. I also think it was just, I don't know, my craft had gotten better over time. It was just, again, luck, a lot of that. So yeah, from there, I was really lucky to get agented by Paige Turlip at Andrea Brown. And she has been my agent ever since. So I want to say that was like 2020. And here we are, still going strong.
I had a similar experience, but it all got compressed during the pandemic and post-pandemic. I guess we're not really post, but during the pandemic. So we had an au pair come and live with us. We were in between people helping in our house. And so one of the things that au pairs do in America, I think this is universal, I don't know. They have to take college level classes. So our au pair signed up for a creative writing class at a local college. And I was like, cool, I also like creative writing. Why don't we creatively write together? She ended up going home during the pandemic, and I ended up starting writing during the pandemic. So I took a writing class, and I went to the first session of this writing class, and the very next week we were under lockdown. So I had one writing class. And my mentor in the class said, you should just keep writing. You can send me your work. We can check in. It's fine. And because I physically cannot do anything by half measure, I was like, I'm going to write a book and I am going to get an agent. I'm going to sell a book and I am going to win, which is not what happened. Like by no stretch of the imagination, because it's much harder than that in reality, especially during the pandemic. So I started querying the summer of 2020, and in relatively short order realized that my first book was not good. Like it just wasn't. I don't know why I was querying it. I should not have been. But it taught me a lot about querying. I've sent a couple of like very bad queries that are like cringeworthy. And then I wrote a second book, and it was an adult horror called Nornicona. And that is the book that got me my first agent. Eunice and I shared this experience. So my first agent, Elle Thompson, was out of Triada, and I was like ultra thrilled because Triada is an amazing agency. And 2 weeks before Christmas, we had my first book out on submission. We were about to go out with the second book, and I was feeling so excited. She seemed so excited. And then I got an email that basically dumped all of us, all of her clients, and we were devastated, right? Because most of us were out in submission. So all our books were pulled. We weren't really shuffled through Triada very much. And then I was like feeling very down in the dumps, right? And an agent who I previously submitted an R&R to, but who ultimately passed on my manuscript, reached out over Twitter and said, you know, I'm having some second thoughts. I keep thinking about your book, and I wonder if I made the wrong decision. Would you feel comfortable sending your materials? I was literally on my way to meet Eunice for lunch when this was happening. And I was like, can I download Microsoft Word on my phone? What do I do? Oh my God. And then a week later, she was like, let's get on a phone call. I think this is it. I didn't speak to anybody else. She's the agent who sold my book. Larissa is the best. But it's been a long journey. So
one thing I want to like for everyone else that goes, I would love to hear also where you were when you got like your agent offer. Because I also feel like mine was like very memorable because I literally cried in a Panera drive-thru because I was so I would love to hear that from everyone else as you guys go.
I was sitting in my office and I was like sobbing as one does. Okay, Eunice, sorry, your turn.
No worries. No, I think did we go to that French place like downtown for lunch? I think I remember that. Yeah, that month of like, was it like January like 2021? That was just like a huge blur, like in retrospect, which is funny. But yeah, so for me, I've had the unique experience of querying pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I'm actually on agent number 3, and so the first time around, it was actually book number 2 that landed me my first agent. And so I started querying for the first time. I think it was like maybe like spring 2016. And I think when I got my first agent offer, it was probably like August 2018. So I was about 2.5 years, and I did like a number of things. The first agent who I ended up with, I actually met at a writers conference, and it was funny because I had signed up for like a pitch session, but I was actually late to the pitch session because my train like was late. But it ended up being okay because they just like rescheduled like my session, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But she's like, oh no, it's okay. And like it was also only like 10 minutes, and so for that, it was a writers conference. I think it was called Quelly, and so and it's a great conference because it's specifically geared for people of color writers. And so that was probably, I think, maybe spring 2018. And so I had pitched my women's fiction novel to her, and then she had asked to see the fall. And so then it was Radio Silence Fall for like a few months. But also while this was all going on, from 2016 2018, I was code querying, but I also did a number of pitch contests with DB Pitt and Pitman. And when the first agent offer came, I think I was still working full time. I also worked full time in publishing. And so, but I think there's just a lot going on in the office. Like the main conference room was like booked for the entire day. And so I couldn't like take the call. And so I think it was like during my lunch break, like, oh my God, it was so awkward because I was trying to find a cafe, but like it was like in the Wall Street area, and I'm just like, I think I like went to like it might have been like a Joe and the Juice, but I like remember I like paid like $9 for the juice, but it was also wild because I'm just like there's also no seating, so I had to like sit outside, so it was a little awkward because it's like you could hear all the traffic in the background, but I still did get that offer call. But I was just like, can't believe I paid $9 for this juice, which wasn't even any good. But okay, I'm getting off topic here. But that was my first agent offer. And so I was with my agent for about 2 years. And then eventually parted ways, but it was pretty amicable. And I think one of the toughest things that before you sign with the agent that most people don't realize is you don't actually know what like the agent author relationship is gonna be until you actually start working with them. And we had just reached a point in which like she had signed me on for a women's fiction novel, but you eventually had moved on to work on a young adult contemporary and like did multiple revision rounds, but it just like reached a point where she felt that she couldn't really help me editorially, but she also like couldn't sell it. So she kind of like gave me an out. It's like, you know, like, but if you still believe in this novel, like I understand if you want to part ways. And like I gave it like some thought, and really it's just like we weren't kind of like vibing editorially anymore, which happens. And I feel like it would be nice because I feel like to this day there's still kind of this taboo of how like once you part ways with your agent, it's something you shouldn't discuss. But when I actually went to my group of writer friends, I was actually pretty surprised at how many of them had parted ways with their agent, in which some of them had gone on to their second, third. I've also had friends who've also basically on their like fourth agent, and it's for like numerous reasons. And so when I made that decision, I think to part ways with my first agent, I think it was October 2020. And so I had to like go back into the career trenches. And I will not lie, that prospect at first was a little terrifying because I think I had a moment of panic. And what I did, I probably, if I had a chance to do it over, I probably would not do this again, but actually create 2 separate novels in 2 separate genres. Like one was women's fiction, one was YA, because I think I just had this moment of panic. I'm like, oh my God, what if I can't like find another agent? And so I did, I also did DB Pit, I did Pitman, and I was also code querying. So it was like a combination of those 2 things. And I think for me, I feel like I did kind of luck out because when I was querying, it was still like pretty early on in the pandemic. So I was only in the career trenches again for the second time around from like, I think it was only 3 months, like October 2020. And then I think when my first agent offer the second time around came, it was like the end of January 2021. And I actually ended up getting 3 offers. And how I handled it, because it was a little awkward because the offer came for the women's fiction novel, but I also still had like a number of agents who had my full for the young adult novel too. So basically what I did was I drafted an email being like, hey, I have an offer. By the way, this is for a women's fiction novel. I can send you this if you want. And luckily it ended up being okay. Somehow most of the agents who had my full, including the ones who had their young adult novel, they're like, yes, like I would like to see the women's fiction novel. And one thing I think I did, which was I was a bit more, for the second time around for querying, I was a bit more strategic. And especially for the most of the agents that I queried agents who represented both age groups, because that was a thing. I know like there are some cases and some agents may only represent kids lit stuff, and some agents only represent adult stuff. And sometimes, you know, like you can have separate agents, but for me personally, I decided I like wanted to have an agent who represented both. And I signed with Elle Thompson at Triada. And she had looked at both manuscripts and had wanted to represent me for both of them. And then we were together for, I think, until January 2021. And then like Taylor, I got that email, I think it was like 2 weeks before Christmas. And so that was definitely kind of an adjustment. And like my first thought was like, do I have to do this again? I just did this. Like, do I have to go back into the career trenches? But what ended up happening was I got an offer from a different Shredder agent who I'm still represented by, Laura Crockett. And what was nice was even though like I had gotten the offer, I still like hopped on a call with her, and because I kind of want to like cover all my bases. And I also sent this very long list of like follow-up questions. I'm just like, by the way, if you can answer all of this. But definitely like one thing that definitely stuck out to me was among the agents that I've talked to like in the past, Laura was also the only agent who had asked me, because I had asked her, one of the questions I asked her was like, what are your expectations for me as a client? But Laura had also asked me, what do you know, she was like, I know if you sign with me, you know, because I hadn't made a decision yet, like this will be agent number 3. So I want to know, you know, like what are your expectations, for me as an agent? Like, what do you need? And that really like stuck out to me because I think at the time, like she was the only agent who had asked that. So she's my current agent and I adore her. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
So let's see. I got to think about this. It was during the pandemic, the theme here. I have worked in mission-based communications and nonprofit management for many years, and I've always written for other people and in other people's voices. And in the pandemic, as I think was the case with many people, your priorities sort of get shuffled. I also have 2 young kids, and my husband was changing jobs. So a lot of stuff was shaking up, and I saw it as an opportunity to decide to do something for myself and write for myself again. And so at that time, I knew I was a really impatient person, which is really difficult in publishing. Honestly, it's like the worst. And I found out about pitch contests. I was like, oh, great. This is like a shortcut. I will take every shortcut that I possibly can. So in August of, I think it was 2022, I participated in DV Pit. And with my middle grade magical realism, and I got a lot of interest. And I was like, oh, okay. I know how to pitch things. Like I've worked in marketing communications for enough years to know that I know how to sell, the idea. Like, do I have the writing chops behind it? And honestly, at that point, my draft was like not fully cooked. And I probably shouldn't have done this, but I will tell you what I did. I submitted to those people, queried those people, and I liken it to like online dating because I felt like they already had, said that they liked me. So I felt more comfortable. And I submitted to those folks, and then I participated in Latinx Pitch, which is always September 15th around that time every year. And I got more interest. So I submitted to those folks. And then I did a little bit of cold querying, and I got super impatient again and wrote another book, which was the YA Contemporary, and started querying that because I wasn't hearing back anything from anybody really. I got like some quick rejects, which honestly, as you go through it longer and longer, you're happy for those because it gets you your step closer to your yes, right? So like treasure those no's, especially if they're quick. And then what happened was someone, one of the agents that had liked my pitch and had asked for the full, like 2 hours later from that pitch contest, finally 6 months later had a chance to read it and offered. And that was then my chance to go back to all of those other folks who had my fulls, but now for 2 different projects, for the middle grade and the YA. Went back to all of those agents and was like, I have an offer on the table, within the next 2 weeks. If you could let me know if you want to call or if you want to read the manuscript that you don't have, here's a very short synopsis of what it is. And so some people took me up on that, and I did get another offer. And that was a person who had liked my pitch in Latinx Pitch. So I ended up going with the second person who offered. So always keep your options open. Honestly, I had the most amazing phone call with the first agent to offer, and I thought, how could it possibly get better than this? And somehow the second agent was excited about both of my manuscripts and had read both and had notes on both already. And I knew like, oh, well, like you put in the work, you're really interested, you really want this, you're starting, a little behind because she wasn't the first agent offering. And we just had the most amazing conversation. It was tough. It's also weird because you're in this totally different position of power when usually as a querying writer, you're not the one making those decisions, right? And then all of a sudden you have to tell an agent no. So it was hard, but I decided on my agent, Roma Panjanavan at Janko and Nesbitt. She's my current agent. Hopefully the agent I'll stick with for a little while, but I don't know. I'm open to, whatever the future holds, but she's been great so far. And we're out on submission with that middle grade book, revising a YA contemporary, and I'm drafting a YA thriller now. So that's sort of where I am in a nutshell.
Cool. I guess I'm up. I sent my first query in 2014, I think. So I've been in it for the long haul. So I started querying with a literary fiction novel in 2014, and I queried very badly. I kind of had an idea of how to write a query letter, but it was really, really terrible. So I queried that book for a bit. I queried my next book after that, which was a literary mystery. I somehow managed to get a full request for it, but it was a really bad book. We don't talk about it anymore. And then I kept going. So then during, I think 2020, I switched back to writing fantasy, which had been like my first love since childhood. And like my first ever novel was a fantasy novel that I started writing when I was like 9 years old, and I finished it like a decade later. Never queried that one because I realized it was not publishable, but it taught me a lot. But I circled back to fantasy because I was feeling, pretty grim about things with the pandemic. So I wrote my first adult fantasy novel. I queried that and realized pretty quickly that it wasn't doing very well, and I didn't think it was particularly marketable. So I stopped querying it and started writing another one. So this is my 5th manuscript now. And I queried that one pretty heavily through 2021 and ended up getting an agent offer right at the beginning of 2022. But it was an agent who I didn't feel confident about their like record or their agency at all. And they'd kind of been like a last ditch, like maybe like a last round before I give up on this book. So, and also at that point, I had finished my 6th manuscript, which was also a fantasy novel. And I knew that it was a whole lot stronger than the other one. So I ended up turning down that first agent offer, and I nudged all the agents who still had it. There were only a couple left, and I didn't get any other offers, so I just shelved that book. So 6th manuscript, 4th-ish fantasy novel. I kept querying that through 2022. Sometime around July of that year, I got a private message over Twitter from an agent who had somehow come across that particular, like my pitch for it or something. I had done a lot of Twitter pitch contests, but I never got much traction from them in terms of like actual requests. And that agent ended up offering. I ended up signing with him in 2022, and then we went on submission with that manuscript. And we were on submission for a while. We actually got an offer pretty quickly, but it was from a small press that I hadn't known we'd gone out to. And nothing wrong with small presses if that's what you want, but that's really not what I wanted. So I turned down the small press offer. And I think from there, my relationship with that agent kind of started going downhill. My next manuscript that I sent him, he approved the pitch, he read the whole thing, and then he said, "Nah, I don't feel like representing this." So there were a couple manuscripts that happened with, and after a few of those, I realized it was time to part ways, since we were not seeing eye to eye for my career. So I left my first agent last summer, so 2023. And one of the manuscripts that he had turned down, that he had said was, I think his words were, he didn't feel like finishing reading it. I thought, this is actually a pretty good book. I'm going to query this one. So I sent out this one, as well as simultaneously I queried a middle grade manuscript. So I just kind of flung everything at the wall and decided to see what stuck. And I ended up getting a lot of requests pretty quickly. And I got requests for both of the manuscripts, which is kind of exciting. And I ended up getting an offer pretty quickly on the manuscript that my first agent had not liked, from an agent who is super, super enthusiastic. She read it in 5 days and offered like right away. So I ended up signing with her, and we went out on submission at the beginning of January this year. And so that's where I'm at. Definitely a very different experience with the second agent. So almost a decade of querying.
Oh my God. Sorry, I just had to unmute to be like, oh my God. Okay, sorry.
Don't worry about it. That is a wild querying journey. I'm going to preface mine by saying mine's annoying in the sense I had a very easy querying journey, but I'll go back because I think it makes up for the fact that my writing journey was not easy. But basically, I wrote a lot as a child. I wrote poetry, fan fiction. I was very on the Avid Gamers forums, if anybody remembers those, doing role plays. But then I quit writing because life and school, and then a lot of other mentors during shutdown, I started writing again and wrote this very fan fiction-y retelling, or I don't even know what. It was Fire Emblem Three Houses, if anybody played that video game. It was very much based on that. And I wrote like 80,000 of this project, which will never see the light of day. But I was like, you know what, I can do this. And so I started writing an adult speculative literary project about a Vietnamese spirit medium during the end of the world. And unfortunately, during the period of revision, oh, my cat's gonna come say hi. Hold on, I'm gonna pick him up like a baby because that's what he wants. All right, there we go. My mother passed during the period of revising this project, which was obviously very sad, and I had to take a long break from it. Now he wants to get down, all right. And I thought long and hard about whether or not I wanted to query with this project, just because, you know, the character has their own mother die during the novel. But I realized that because it was personal, I still wanted to work on it, right? So I revised it and worked with a mentor through Avengers of Color at the time. I don't believe the mentorship exists anymore. Started querying in, I can't even remember anymore. It was March, yes, March 2022. And I had gone in actually kind of like the opposite of Taylor, where I was like, I'm just going to shoot my shot and throw it into the world, and it will probably not work out and it's fine. I just want to like do it and then move on. But I got my first offer in April. So this agent was very quick with reading. They requested after a few days, read in within a week. And so I went back and was able to like nudge everybody I'd queried because it's been a month, and had a second offer from another agent who I really, really liked. I ended up choosing the first agent who offered though. And later we'll talk about kind of decisions with looking at agents, but for me, it was around, you know, an agent who had a really good sales record, but also was kind of at a smaller boutique agency versus like a huge agency. And personally, I felt a little bit more secure. I don't know if it's based in fact or just like I felt better being at a smaller agency. And so that's also what went into my choice. And we'll talk about submission. That adult project did not do well on submission, but that's fine. That's part of the deal. But my agent has been very sweet and supportive. It's Caitlin Detweiler at Jill Greenberg Literary Management. Taylor and I are agency CSIVs, as are some of the other mentors. So.
Awesome. Well, I guess for me, mine was kind of interesting because I started out thinking I wanted to do picture books. And really early in the journey, I was like, oh, I can do rhyme. Picture books are easy. And so I submitted out and heard nothing. And I very quickly realized I had not worked on the craft enough. And so I kind of pivoted. And SCBWI, they have this, it's kind of like a speed pitching event. You can agents and editors, and they can give you quick feedback on the spot. And so I pitched my picture books to them, and I feedback like, hey, your style looks really great for graphic novels, but I don't think they quite work for picture books. And so I was like, you know, let me just take a graphic novel course just to see if I like it. You know, I grew up reading manga. I love comics. So I'm like, I feel that this could be definitely in my wheelhouse. And so I took the course and immediately fell in love with it. And it was the first time that somebody was like, oh, hey, your writing's good, your illustration's good. It wasn't like, oh, you don't really fit in this picture book realm. It's like, we accept you in graphic novels. And I just, at the time, I was also kind of going through, you know, losing a friend, and, you know, it was around the pandemic time. And so I was staying in touch with a lot of my friends through video games. And so it kind of like just evolved into this organic story that I ended up querying or pitching with was the one that I made in that graphic novel course, and just immediately fell in love. And so I started doing Twitter pitching. And I did a couple, so I don't think that this is something that I would recommend for people, but I did a few, and then I queried after I did a few Twitter pitch events, so I could kind of like get all of the likes together. And through all of those, so I did a DVP at GN at the time, and I ended up getting 14 interested, like agents and editors, and I queried 8 agents, ended up getting 6 interested in 5 offers. So it was kind of crazy because, you know, all of them were people I queried. Even like there was one person who reached out through Twitter and was like, hey, I really like your a query for picture books and just illustration in general, not for graphic novels. So it was kind of interesting just to hear everyone's thoughts on, my illustration and then also, graphic novels and my writing in particular. And so, yeah, I'll be honest with you, like, it was very stressful for me. But one of the things that stood out about my current agent, who her name's Chelsea Eberly from Greenhouse Literary, she's incredible. Like, if you guys want an agent to back you up and who can sell projects, she is so awesome. But I just remember in the offer call, she and I vibed, and we actually came up with an idea for an entirely new book from the one that I pitched. And it's actually the one that we ended up selling. It's cramming. It's going to come out with Little Brown in 2027. It's a graphic novel, middle grade. I love it. And yeah, it's just crazy because it wasn't even the book I pitched with, but we just vibed and we were like, this would make a better debut. So let's go with this. And I'm working on it now and it's been a blast. So Chelsea's great. Love her so much.
So I think actually this is a very good time to talk about why we chose the agents we chose if we had more than one offer. And actually, almost more importantly, why we queried the agents we queried if we didn't get our queries kind of handed to us from like a pitch contest. Because I remember at the beginning, and I think that we should unmute for this, actually. I think this should be a conversation. I personally remember at the very beginning not really understanding the difference between a good agent and a bad agent, how to even begin to like tell the difference. And so a lot of my early querying was marred, I think, partially by the fact that I simply didn't know like what genre I was writing in, really, like what age group I was writing in, which agencies were like, there are some that are like massive transatlantic agencies. Like, is that where you should start? Or should you start at a boutique agency? Is that what you want? Do you want a boutique experience versus like a larger agency with different kinds of mentorship for the agents, not necessarily for the author? And does that matter? So does somebody want to start on this extremely important topic?
I can start, I guess, because so one of the things you just said that came to mind immediately for me was like, how do you even begin to start? Because I've kind of like what Hien said, I've always been a writer like my whole life, and it's kind of like been a hobby of mine. But I didn't really understand for a long time that publishing was a thing. Like I just kind of like in my mind, books just existed, and I didn't really think about like someone writes them and then they have to like find a way to get it published. And so when I finally was like, okay, I want to try and get a book published, I didn't understand agents at all. Like I was like, I don't know where these people come from. I don't know how you access them. I knew nothing. Like I literally went to the library and got one of like, like the like publishing for dummies type books where they have like the agents from like the 90s that like aren't even agents anymore. Like that's what I was like, not even like using the internet. So one of the things, like pieces of advice that I had heard that I go back and forth on was like kind of the first place to look is to just like look at the back of the books of your like favorite authors, which I think is true to an extent because like people typically in the back of the book will like say, thank you to my agent. And you can kind of write them down as like, okay, they like the same kind of things I do. But what I found was a lot of the agents I was writing down for that are like the like top of the top agents because the books I was reading were the best of the best sellers. So like, they're not usually accepting, people who are like writing their first book, for example. And so what I found from that was that I think it's a good way to get a feel for like who agents are, kind of like who are the names in the industry. And then from there, you can kind of look like who else is at the agency, who works with them, who's training under them. For me, I actually got 2 agent offers on my second book, and I ended up going with the second agent. So Paige was actually not the first agent that offered to me. And there's a lot that goes into that, and I don't want to like monopolize this. So I'm sure other people have similar experiences and we kind of bounce back and forth. But for me, it really just came down to like, I felt understood my book better than the other agents that I was like looking at and considering. And it was really apparent. One other thing I will say, just in terms of like newer agents, because when I signed with Paige, she actually didn't have any public deals at all, which is again, another thing people are like, make sure that they've sold books or have a lot of experience. I will say there are many agents who do not have public deals who have sold books. Like that is not the end all be all of books. So just as like a general, I don't know, general advice, I guess, is like query the people that you think will be interested in your book and that you think you could have a good working relationship with, and you can figure out the logistics of how that relationship will mesh together as you're going through the querying journey, if that makes sense. Like, you don't need to have all the answers at the beginning. So that's kind of, I think, high level.
For me, I think the second time around, like I had like a number of different considerations, and I'm also definitely in the boat that a bad agent is actually a lot worse than having no agent, in which they can cause like irreparable damage to your career. So honestly, it's better to have no agent than a bad agent. And at that point, like the second time around, because I already worked with an agent, I kind of already had a better idea of what I was looking for in the author-agent relationship. And so there were a number of different considerations. And I might have been you, Taylor, who you were talking about how the whole thing with like big agencies versus like smaller agencies. And it is one of those things I will say, because I was rep by Writer's House the first time around. It was one of those things in which I do think one of the things that can happen when you are at one of those bigger agencies is if you're not a star client, you can possibly feel like you might be falling through the cracks a little. And so that is something to take consideration. And so why I went with Trotter in the end, I actually went with an associate agent. And I actually like the fact that like her list of clients was smaller. Like by the time I had left my first agent, I didn't know the exact number, but don't quote me on this, but I think like an agent, like an average number of clients, if they're like pretty well established, is anywhere from like 20 to 40 and up. But like I'm pretty sure by the time I left, she most likely had over 40 clients. But when I signed with an associate agent who's near with publishing, I actually like the idea that she had like a smaller client pool, so she would be able to kind of like devote more attention to me. And so the second time around, I had 3 agent offers, and I went with my second agent for numerous reasons. She was the agent who wanted to represent me both for my YA and also my women's fiction novel. I felt like we really connected during the call, and I talked about, like other writing projects I was working on, and she was really enthusiastic. And I also agree, there could be numerous reasons why, like, you could be looking up like an agent, like an associate agent, like a newer agent, and they may not have a sales history, but it's possible. Like, it's like for numerous reasons in which like it's stuff that's like being like the contracts are still being negotiated. Like I know like off the top of my head right now, like for my own agent, like she's probably like sitting on like 4 to 5 like deal announcements. So it may look like the last year that she hasn't made a lot of deals, but it's the reality is like it's numerous reasons why like deals may not go public. And I also think and maybe for Publishers Marketplace, like they typically don't announce like sequel deals, for example. And so it's so that's not always, I feel like, the accurate measure. And for me, Trotter, well, it was a small agency. Like when I had a call, like I also knew that they were very well connected with the industry. And it was also an associate agent in which I knew she was being mentored well as too. And so, yeah, those were like the numerous different considerations that I kept in mind.
So both times I had an offer, my second offer was from the same agent. So the first time I got an offer, another agent made an offer. And of course, you get on it's important to know that if somebody makes you an offer, unless there's something glaringly like wrong, like they're from like Joe Schmo agency, you get on the phone call because you never know. So that's the first thing. So of course I got on the call. And I was blown away by this agent's interest in my books. And she didn't have a sales record. She was also an associate agent. She was just starting out. But I was like, you know what? I really like her. Like, I really vibe with her. But it is so, so important to speak to current clients. So if you get an offer, hopefully when you get an offer, it is so like, ask them like point blank, be like, would you mind giving me the names of your other clients so that I can speak to them about their relationship and experience with you? This is a business relationship. The friendship comes later. So like, it's really important to vibe with your agent and for them to get your book, but truly, because it's a business relationship, you have to have an understanding of how they work with their clients, not just you. And when I spoke to this agent's other clients, they were like, we really like her. Unfortunately, we feel like, she cannot sell our books. And we all like collectively felt this way. So I said, you know what? No matter how much I like this person, and even when she offered to me the second time, it's like, no matter how much I like you, that doesn't mean my book is going to sell with you. And ultimately, that's the point of this relationship, right? So I would say, like, tuck that in your back pocket. Remember to talk to current clients, not just check PM, Publishers Marketplace, because as has been said, it's not super accurate anyway. And it's also very delayed and all that. And Publishers Weekly is too. And so you just, like everything in publishing, it's really difficult to get a clear picture, which is why it's better to rely on the community around people to make your choices. That's all I'll say on that. Somebody else want to chime in?
Yeah, for me, because I got 5 agent offers, it was pretty challenging to figure out who I wanted to go with, because there were a lot of really incredible agents and stuff, and I definitely vibed with quite a few of them. But, it's just because you vibe with someone doesn't mean they can sell your project, and so for me, I definitely, as others have said, I did take a look at Publishers Marketplace. One thing in particular I liked about my agent was she was very editorial, and that too is, do you want an agent that just, she gets your project and goes out and tries to sell it, or do you want them to actually like work with you, try to make it better before they go out? And my agent, she used to be an editor at Random House, and so just kind of knowing she had that editorial experience to me was really huge. And, the other things, like I did take a look at their social medias, like agents look at us. I wanted to look at them to see, maybe we have a connection or shared interest here and there, and also just to get a sense for like their client base. How do they interact with their clients? Are they on social media? If they are, do they like root and try to promote their clients? And so how do they do that? And so all of those things were considerations I had, but I actually made like a chart for me personally. Like I had kind of like a ranking chart of all the things that were most important to me in an agent, and I rated them on a scale from 1 to 5, because towards the end it was kind of between 2 agents and I just didn't know who to go with. And so doing that chart and seeing who got like the highest ranking is ultimately what helped. And it just so happened that this person was the one I innately connected with the most to. So it ended up working out for me. But yeah, definitely, do your research and your due diligence, and even if you do that, sometimes, it doesn't work out, and that's okay too. But yeah, definitely the referrals, that's a big thing. Don't be afraid to ask. Everybody does. I have had friends who haven't asked, and then, things come up a little bit later down the line. And you can ask for more than 1 referral. It can be like 2, it can be 5. Like it doesn't have to just be 1. And also, if you're not sure, you can have a follow-up call. Like I had a follow-up call with 2 agents that I was considering. That ultimately really helped me in my decision as well. So, don't be shy. Reach out if you're not sure. And they want to have you, so they're gonna make the effort to try to get you.
I'll add in that for me, I was between essentially a bigger agent at a smaller boutique agency versus a more junior agent at a really big agency. And I ended up choosing the former. And I think, there are big benefits to big agencies, and clearly junior agents there can sell books and do. But for me, it was kind of a balance of realizing I wanted to be at a smaller agency. And I think you can never tell, right? So I think our advice is do your due diligence, talk to people, do as much research. But I think sometimes the narrative, especially on Twitter, can be like, well, you should do these things in response to like bad agent situations. But sometimes someone can do all the work and still, end up in a not stellar agent situation. So definitely don't you blame yourself if that's the case. But for me, I kind of lucked out where I had ended up making the right choice, because the other agent who offered ended up leaving their agency for another one, which is fine, right? That happens all the time. But had I been their client at the time, I don't know how that would have gone, right? So for me, I was like, okay, I stayed with an agency who's been at this boutique agency forever versus a newer agent, which ended up working out for me. A tip I have on top of talking to clients, especially clients who have not sold, is you can search tweets and Twitter by people's Twitter bios. They'll often like tag their agent. You can search an agent's handle, and I just honestly was creeping like, okay, how many clients are still unsold, and are they still their clients? And so that's a good indication that an agent is there for your career, versus if I couldn't find anybody, I was like, oh, so you only still have clients that you've sold a book for, right? And so what does that mean for me if I don't end up selling? Which is obviously very scary, but I think valid, because at least for me, my agent has been very supportive. And even though my first book essentially died on submission, they have never like wavered. They've been like, we'll find a home one day. Like, I still believe in you. And that's meant a lot. So, and that's, again, it's all agents are going to tell you, like, I'm here for your career, and trying to figure out what's the truth is going to be really hard. But I think the communities and trying to talk to people will be your best bet.
That Twitter tip is so good, because I forgot that I did that until you just said it, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember. I was like really creeping on some authors on Twitter. So
not me, like,
you can also
adding to people's DMs. Like,
yeah,
why?
Or sometimes you can look on Publishers Marketplace, and sometimes like the people who have sold will not still be with their agent. So that's something that you can look at as well. My situation was a little different because I didn't have a choice between agents. So like all 3 times I got an offer, it was, do I sign with the agent or do I keep querying? And I mean, you just sometimes you just really can't know. Like the agent that I signed with first didn't raise any red flags. And I mean, I don't think it was a red flag agency. It was just not a good fit. And I did all my research. I checked with clients. I did everything that I could. And sometimes you just really don't know. And that's just how it goes. And that's not your fault. But I will say with my current agent, who is absolutely wonderful, I love her. She's great to work with. One of the things that totally made me excited to sign with her was that during our call, so my book has prominent queer and disability rep. And during our call, she was specifically like, I love these things about the book. Let's do more with them, which made me feel a lot more comfortable, because my first agent had never even really mentioned that those things existed in my books. So especially if you're writing from a marginalized community, then having your agent support that is really important.
I would definitely piggyback on that. For me, it was really important that my agent, if they weren't from the same marginalizations that I'm from, that at least they understood it and were excited about that part of my writing that deals with like the adoptee community, people of Latin American descent. Spanish is sprinkled throughout many of my manuscripts. Like, I needed somebody who would understand that and go to bat for that and really, fight for me. And so I was lucky that both of the agents that it offered were women of color. They were both what I would consider, you might hear this term, like young and hungry, which, being like unapologetically really excited about my career. Like, I wanted other people who were like really excited to turn this into a career with me. And so I think that like young and hungry aspect was really important to me. And I am probably in the minority here, because I did end up going with the agent who had a couple more years of experience, but had been like assisting on a lot of deals and a lot of books. They were actually big books. My agency is a very big agency, but she doesn't have a lot of sales under her belt. But I could tell, because she had been mentored by people there, and because she had worked, alongside folks that were making these deals, like I felt pretty confident that, she was going to be working well for me. And I guess when she was trying to do her sales pitch about like why go with a bigger agency, she talked about resources. It is, I think, Taylor, you talked about like a transatlantic agency. It is, which means that like sub rights can be a little bit easier, especially because English world rights often are not, like UK and, particular English speaking countries. So that's sort of wrapped up in it. They also have folks who like, we we're on submission with some like film companies, and they have other agents that work in that. So they have like, because it's a big agency, they have a lot of resources that the smaller agency didn't, that was more boutique. And we'll see how it works out. I mean, it's all sort of a crapshoot. And I think one of the other themes that you're hearing from people is like the ability to pivot, where you are now. If it's not working for you, like someone else said, like no agent is better than a bad agent. So I'm happy for now. I'm at a big agency, and for me, it was really, does this person have a passion for my work, and will they support the choices that I'm making as a writer, especially coming from different marginalizations.
I want to just quickly add to this that if you are disabled, it is extremely important from the outset of your conversation with whatever offering agent you have to say, look, personally, I don't do well on phone calls. I can't tell what people's faces are doing, so I have no idea how to talk to them. Makes me really uncomfortable. So my first question to my now agent was, are you cool with every single one of our conversations being a Zoom call? Because some people really don't want to do that. And so part of becoming part of this community, I think, is learning how to self-advocate for things like your marginalizations, your disabilities, being very forthright about it, because number one, they're not going to know. And perhaps if they have like 40 clients, it just simply won't cross their minds to check. So it's important for you to say from the outset, like, these are the things I need. And that's okay, because it's a business relationship and you're each getting something, right? You're getting editorial advice and connections in publishing. They're getting IP and a 15% cut or a 20% cut of your sales. So it's okay to ask for concessions. We are almost at an hour, so I want to quickly just turn to submission because I realized that not a ton of people know what happens when a book is, when an author is taken on as a client. What happens to the book? What happens after you go through edits? So I think we should get a bunch of just like quick, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this so that we have more time for questions, but I think we should talk about it, especially since some of us are longtime submission veterans. Who wants to go first? Who's been on submission the longest? Eunice.
I also think I've also had the unique experience of being out on submission pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, because I can assure you, at least from my experience, there has been a definite difference for sure. And it's for numerous reasons. Like, it's similar to how I know the state of querying, it's pretty tough right now. And so definitely, and it's interesting because I also have had some writer friends who've only gone on submission like post-pandemic, and like when I tell them the first time around when I was out on submission, like it was probably from the period of probably like I think November 2018 until like spring 2020. Part of it, I do think, was who my agent was, in which she was extremely well connected in the industry. She was like a 20-year veteran, and she was on the editorial side at Simon & Schuster, and basically climbed up the corporate ladder and was like a VP at an imprint, and then eventually made the switch into Agington. Because of that, she was very well connected in the industry. But when I tell some of my writer friends for that women's fiction novel that we went on submission with, we did I think 2 to 3 rounds. The first one was a very large round, so it was, I think, a round of 18 editors. The second round was 8 editors, but both of those rounds, I think between those 2 rounds, and I think the last one was a group of 6, between all 3 of them, we were maybe ghosted twice at the most. But I definitely know for the first both of those rounds, it was a round of 18. The second round was 8. Both of those submission rounds finished in 2.5 months. Basically, we heard back from every single editor except for maybe a ghost for 1 or 2 of them.
I just had a physical reaction to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Part of it, I think, was my agent was very well connected. But yeah, like we heard back, like it didn't matter like how big, like 18 versus 8, like we heard back in 2.5 months. And so the last one was a little different because I did what's called a rewrite and resubmit. And so that's basically when an editor is really interested in your work, but they kind of feel like you need to do some more editor work because that they may feel the manuscript that they have at the moment, it's not quite strong enough to pass through acquisitions. And so I agreed to do an R&R, and I hopped on the phone, like had a great call with that specific editor. For like an hour, I think, and had some notes. And I did the R&R, took a few months, and I think we had sent that like fall 2019. But then the editor then basically what I call proceeded to hold that R&R hostage for 6 months. And then after I heard back from the 6 months, she asked for a second R&R on top of the first one. And at that point, I was just too burned out with that project. And so I declined the opportunity to do the second R&R. And I think at that point, like there's a part of me that's just like, can you please just buy my book first? Like, and so, yeah, but at that point I knew like I was not like in the right headspace. And for the same book, we had actually got an offer from a small press, but and my agent, like at the time, it was actually her first time submitting to that specific small press, so she couldn't have known this. But like when we got the publication contract, she actually advised me to turn it down, and I asked her to send it to me because I wanted to take a look at the terms. I was just like, yeah, these terms are really bad, and this is not how I want to break out into publishing. Like, I don't want my debut to break out in this way. And so I was actually really kind of thankful for her for advising me to like turn that down. She was like, yeah, I don't think this is him. And I was like, I agree with you on this. And so, yeah, that was my experience pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. It's like been numerous reasons, like basically the general gist seems to be for submission, like the wait times are much longer. And so when I started with my second agent, I think we did about like maybe like one major revision round, then like a small round after that. And so this was probably like spring 2021, I believe. And we were still out on submission until like December 2021. And that's when my second agent, she left. She left publishing. And so what she did was, thankfully, ended up working out for me okay, because I was still represented by the same agency. So what that agent did was I think at the time I was only out to a couple of editors. What she did is she pulled their submission from those remaining editors and then let those editors know of their transition of representation. And so with my third agent, still rep by the same agency, she floated the idea, like when we were on a call together, like, would you be open to do a revision together? And honestly, like, I didn't tell her at the time, but in my mind, I was like, girl, I'll do whatever it takes to sell this book. So we pulled the remaining submissions and did another major revision together, which I was actually pretty happy with because I do think it made the book a lot stronger because it was a women's fiction novel, but we kind of pulled back on kind of more the rom-com elements and kind of made it more into upmarket fiction. And so and then we went on submission with that. I think it was actually the same. It was probably like a year after. So that was probably I think late spring, maybe early summer 2022. And so agents like will have different submission strategies. And so like some will do rounds, and so rounds can vary from like small rounds or like large rounds, in which they can vary from anywhere as small to I think like 5 to 10, 5 to 20, possibly even more, and so on. And so I think that first round from spring 2022, I think it was maybe just under like 10 editors we went out on submission with. But well, my agent will start off with kind of like an initial submission round. What she does is every time like we get a pass from a editor, like we'll submit to like a new editor. And so I think that submission strategy is called rolling submissions, essentially. And so That's usually how she does submissions. And so it's been like a mixed bag because I'm still out on submission. And so like, God, I don't even know with passage of time, but yeah, now it's 2024. And so we still have a few agents that we're looking to hear back from. But I also feel like, once again, part of it is like the state of the industry as a whole. But I feel like there have been a few unlucky cases in which I've had editors basically hold on to my submission for so long that either they've moved publishing houses or they've like literally like left the industry. And it was actually a while because I think I had this conversation like with my agent. I asked her like, have you ever had to pull submissions? And she said, I'll be honest with you, like pre-pandemic, I would never have pulled a submission, but she's had to do that a few times because editors have held on to submissions for maybe like over a year, possibly two. And she's like, yeah, like, so basically I think what she'll do is like, she'll basically have like a closing date and they'll be like, and she'll like email the remaining editors on submission, be like, hey, like, this is the closing date, we're gonna pull. So either we hear back from you by then or we don't. And so, yeah, it is.
I want to just say, for the benefit of people who don't know this, those agencies that say, if you query our agency and we say, and that agent says, no, you can't query anybody else, that is how submission is. So one of the really important things about choosing your agent is that you are doing so with the understanding that they make your book the absolute best it can be, because you really only have one shot per imprint, unless your agent is like slightly bending the rules. Some do. But for the most part, if you go out on submission to, say, Delacorte, and they hold your book for 6 months and they finally get back to you with a no, Delacorte is off the list. You can no longer go back to Delacorte with your book, even if there are different editors within Delacorte who might like your book. So when you choose an agent, it's important to choose one who you really think understands your book and can make it the best it can be. Because to be totally honest with you, the expectation now, I think, from what I understand from other authors I've talked to, is that your book must be basically publishing ready by the time you go out on submission. It used to be that editors had enough time to work with you editorially, and some still do, but I would say for the most part, you're doing the majority of the editorial work before you go on submission, and that's not how it used to be. That's why they're called editors, but no longer. Okay, so I know everybody's freaking out. Okay, yeah, I know. But I'm going to echo what Eunice said and say that it takes a very, very, very long time. Submission, it's hard to, after you spend so much time in the querying trenches, the transition to submission, you're like, oh my God, I got an agent. And I at least felt this way. I was like, I'm on submission. And then I waited. And then I waited. And I had a book die. And then I waited. And then I got an offer. But like, it takes a very long time. My first book was on submission for almost 2 years. So prepare yourself mentally. I wish I'd prepared myself. I remember reading, one of those submission stories. And the author, the anonymous author wrote, I was not prepared mentally. Like I didn't buy enough chocolate ice cream. Like I was not ready for how long this would take. So I would say I know that this is just a primer, but I just want you to know that my biggest piece of advice is to always be writing the next thing, because it will take your mind off of the sting of rejection that ultimately kind of exists as the status quo. No matter how good you are, no matter whether or not you sell in a 6-figure deal, you will get passes and you will every time be like, oh my God, that's another imprint. So you just have to like always be writing something else. I'm really sorry.
Yeah. I want to add to that too. So I have like two separate things to say. I will say, I actually feel like I had the kind of opposite experience in terms of submission. So I have like lots of thoughts on this. The first thing is that, just to like Taylor's point overall about like you get an agent, you're like, oh my gosh, I have an agent. Like I finally did the thing. And now you're like in the submission trenches essentially, which feels very similar to the querying trenches. Something that I've learned about publishing is the power dynamics feel like a roller coaster. Like at one minute you feel like I have absolutely no power. And then all of a sudden all these agents want to sign you, for example, or like, you have an agent offer and you're like, wait, now I have all this power. I don't know what to do because I like wasn't expecting this. And then you get an agent and now you're waiting for editors and you're like, no one's listening to me. I have no power again. And then editors want to buy your book and all of a sudden you have all this power and you're trying to decide between them. And it feels very much like you either are at the bottom or the top for like very short amount of times. And so that's like the first piece to what Taylor's saying is that there's, at least in my experience, which granted is still limited, I feel like there will never be a part of the publishing journey where you will feel like I am in complete control of my destiny and everything feels completely in my hands. And the only thing you can really control is the thing that you're writing, the next thing that you're working on. And so that is like, I think the biggest piece of advice that no matter where you are in your journey, like that is like you can control your book and making your book the best book that you were capable of making at that time. Other than that, you just have to relinquish everything else because so much of it is out of your control, which I think on the one hand is not fun because I like control. So I like being in control of things. But on the other hand, I feel like it's almost freeing in the sense that I can't control it anyway. It has nothing to do with anything that I've necessarily done, which I think is a mindset that comes with a lot of rejection. And just after a while, you just kind of get used to like the rejection isn't a rejection of you or a reflection on even like the quality of your work. A lot of times it's just there's so many other reasons that come into play that honestly, I feel like are not that often or more often than not unrelated to the quality of your book. Like at least in my experience and the experience of like the authors that I know, it's not usually related to the quality of your book. There's usually 10,000 other factors that are completely subjective. I will say my submission journey was, the other thing I was going to say that was the transition into this is that I feel like at each stage, it's like back to square one. Like you're querying, if you like, let's say you like query and you try and get an agent, you don't get an agent with that book, you start the next book, go to query that one, completely clear slate. It is as if this is your first time querying other than you have the knowledge of the last time you queried. The same thing, once you get an agent, you go on submission. Every time you go on, it's a clean slate. And so, and like, I think the mindset feels that way a lot of times. And so for me, I feel like it took me kind of a long-ish time. I mean, granted, like, I feel like so many querying journeys are like different. But it took me a longer time than I would have hoped to get an agent. But then submission, it also took me a long time to go on submission. So after I got my agent, I think we edited my book for like a year, almost. Like it got to the point where we were like, I was like, Paige, like, when are we going on submission? Like, I'm just like eager to go on submission. But we finally got to a place where we both felt like confident that it was ready to go on submission. And I feel like I was really lucky that my book sold pretty quickly, which was the exact opposite experience I had prior to that, because it's, again, every time you do something within publishing, it's a new experience. Like nothing is ever going to be the same twice. And so I guess to like the general, like, I feel like it's just random. So I feel like I was pretty lucky. Mine sold like within a month. But that being said, also, I still got a lot of rejection. So it wasn't like everyone just wanted to buy my book and it sold. It was everyone just happened to respond quickly and a bunch of people said no. And then I ended up finding an editor who did want to buy my book. And it just was very condensed. Like it was like querying, but condensed. So that was my experience. It was a little bit different, I think, but all that to say, submission is a very weird thing that just never looks the same no matter what. Yeah.
Yeah, mine was a little bit unique just because graphic novels are different from just like textbooks. So basically you put together a pitch package, which has like illustrations in it. So you have like your sample graphic novel pages. You also might have some manuscripts. Some people don't even will take any manuscript. We actually sold without any manuscripts when we submitted. So every editor is a little bit different. And then generally you'll also have things like character bios, which usually will have sketches. You might have like a cover page that you illustrated. And oftentimes people will come in either as like an author illustrator or like an author and illustrator team. You do sometimes see author only, but usually it's when they have experience in the past publishing things. We're not seeing as much often nowadays just being author only without kind of having that illustrator too, because it's just an easier sell when you know both parties are coming in together. for the book, because if they're not, they're going to have to find an illustrator, so it just takes a bit longer. But for me, my submission experience was very, very interesting, because basically we literally within a day got interest, and then we had a call the following week. And basically they were like, well, we love it, but my boss doesn't want to sell it. So, or to make an offer rather. And so basically we continued being on submission. They dropped out of it despite the editor loving it. And something kind of magical happened. So during the time of the submission, we entered the project into, there's this website called Kids Comics Unite, which essentially they have like this pitch event, which is an annual thing. You can submit your book to it. And basically they have a ton of agents and editors that look at your work. And so this was their first year doing it. And I asked my agent, I'm like, do you think we should do this? I have this feeling like maybe we should. And so we did, and we ended up placing second in that pitching contest. And we actually had quite a few editors reaching out to us from both like, the big five, also like smaller presses, mid-size as well, who were interested in seeing more. And essentially we ended up getting our first offer, which was somebody who had initially had it before we submitted to Pitch Fest, and then they saw it at Pitch Fest, made the first offer, and then all of a sudden we ended up having an auction situation, which for those who don't know what an auction is, it basically means multiple editors make an offer for your book, and then you get to decide who you want to go with. And usually there is a closing period. There's different types of auctions, but for ours, my agent sent kind of like a deadline being like, hey, give us your highest offer by this deadline, and then we'll let you know who we end up going with. And so I ended up going with the editor who just understood my story. My story is about someone in a scoliosis brace. She had a scoliosis brace when she was younger. And it's just been a great relationship. And once we sold, that's when you actually start working on the graphic novel illustrations for the rest of it. So you kind of only show like, a few pages. And then once you sell, you start actually working on the rest of the book. So that's where I'm at now. But yeah, it's submission. It's crazy, especially when you first go on submission. I had so much anxiety. I was constantly checking email. It's like nothing really prepares you quite for that. Even querying, like it feels a little bit different, because if you die in submission, it feels like your book's dead. If you kind of, if you go on querying, there's always more agents. So it just feels a little bit more final, or at least to me when I first started going on it.
I was going to add, because Taylor asked me to say more, but on what was just said, the weird thing about submission is very often at imprints, there will be an acquisitions team that has to approve of any kind of single acquisition. So even if an individual editor is really, really passionate and like loves your project, if sales or marketing says no, it's kind of dead in the water. Or maybe everybody says yes, but the publisher, who is literally the person who can sign the check for money and give permission, they say no, right? And so it sucks. But that's another thing that, I don't know, to kind of wrap your head around, where no longer is it one person's choice. It is like the publishing machine that now is consuming your work and deciding whether or not it wants it. And so I know this can sound like super negative, but it's more so like, it's not personal. It's really like truly not about your individual project. It's about this kind of weird business that's also an art, but also a business that we all are in now.
I'll chime in a little. I also forgot to mention, because I also used to work on the publishing house side. It was interesting because I kind of been on both sides. So I was that person, because I used to work for an editor. Like I sat in on acquisitions meetings, and like I know what that was all about. But then when I was on submission myself, I still felt like a total newbie all over again. And the state of acquisitions also has changed, because it does also differ from house to house. So we talked about like the big five of publishing, and they'll call the big five Penguin House, Hachette, Macmillan, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster. They'll call the big five because they control about 60% of what's called trade publishing. So trade publishing is what you see in Barnes & Noble, what you see in airports, and like anthropology and whatnot, and it's different from academic publishing. But acquisitions at a big publishing house will differ from like an indie publishing house or like a mid-sized publisher. And really the only exception with something that's taken to an acquisitions board. And so I from my own experience, I feel like basically when you get an offer, there are basically like 3 different categories. And really the only exception to that is what's called a preemptive offer. And that's basically when an editor wants your book so much that they don't want like any other editor at a different publishing house to snatch it up. And so typically when I worked I was at Salmon & Schuster specifically. When I worked for a senior editor, she wanted to preempt a contemporary young adult novel. And so instead of going through, she was able to basically bypass the regular acquisitions meeting that was held like once a week. And she went directly basically to the publisher and the editor director of the imprint. An imprint is a subdivision within a publishing house, basically being like, hey, like I really want this, I want to make an offer. And with a preempt offer, it usually comes with a time limit. And so it's typically, I believe it's still like 48 hours to 72 hours. And in this particular case, I think we were able to give the author and the agent a bit more time because the agent was actually at a book conference. And so we did keep that in consideration because she was like in a different time zone, essentially. But a preempt, I feel like, is really, off the top of my head, the only exception to going to a regular acquisitions meeting. And another case is your book can also go what's called to book auction. And also as somebody who like didn't realize when that publishing is a career they can pursue, like I feel like for auctions, most people have this idea of an auction as kind of like an art auction where you have, you're holding up like a paddle or whatnot. But a book auction is just simply when more than one editor is interested in your book. And auctions can take place over days or numerous rounds and whatnot. So it could be like a first round, just like a 1-round auction. It can be a 2-round auction and whatnot. But yeah, that's typically how acquisitions work. And I also feel like post-pandemic, I have heard from my industry friends, some imprints are actually having less acquisitions meeting, and part of it is typically also like when you want to set up like a book auction, like it is also more difficult because it could be that your imprint staff is also like working, like a majority of them is working or still working remotely. So it's like trying to set up an auction and having everyone like in-house, like in the office for that is also it's just like it's getting more difficult. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on the publishing house side and acquisitions I want to add.
So I just noticed the time. So, I mean, feel free to drop questions into the chat. We're going to get to as many as we possibly can. We might not even get to writing sprints. So sorry. We can also hold them in the mentee Discord. So let me move us to questions. I'm going to ask that we all mute, and whoever wants to answer a question, just unmute. All right, Yan, you do it.
So I posted the first question, and I think it's going to get highlighted, and that was, how has having an agent impacted how you brainstorm story ideas and your writing process? And so I can go first. My agent is very flexible, so I can send her like a pitch or just a blurb or even like several pages and get her feedback, and she'll kind of tell me what her thoughts are on each project, what resonates with her, and her kind of sense of the market. I will say she's very positive. Like my agent has never said like, I don't like this to me. She's been very encouraging, but she has been like, this seems like a very, for lack of a better term, like high concepts, like sexy project for right now. So you may want to focus on this. But that's really been the only thing. It's nice having someone I can like bounce ideas off of and have that market kind of expertise to guide me. And some agents are very different. So I'll let other folks answer. But
I mean, I usually just like throw spaghetti at my agent. Unfortunately, she is the repository of like 14 random ideas that I have at any time. So usually what I do is I write a pitch. It's basically a query. It's a little bit longer usually because I can't control myself. And then if she kind of feels positively towards it, I then, unfortunately, to any of you pantsers out there, please start outlining your books because you're going to need it. This is a very good thing to have like as a skill, not just because you want to be able to communicate with your agent how you want your story arc to run, but once hopefully you're on submission, you're going to need to like think about the next book. If your first book gets sold, what are you going to do for book 2, book 3, that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I would say my brain comes up with ideas, and no matter what the idea is, my poor agent, love you, Larissa, receives those ideas. So it's not so much that my brainstorming has changed, but my process has changed. So now I'm like very formalized about it. I have a folder for each book and each idea. And even if it's only a pitch and an outline in that folder, that's what I have, and I can send that. Anybody else want to answer this question?
I guess I could. Just real fast, like my agent really got me into plotboarding because it helps her edit. So for those who don't know what plotboarding is, it's essentially you kind of make sticky notes, and you can use like a 3-act to 4-act structure, whatever works for you. And essentially you can post sticky notes. And I use a program called Miro, which is really great. Free online program. It's basically kind of like for whiteboarding tools. And what was really nice about it is she asked me, hey, can you make a plotboard of this? Because it helps me see the balances. Because you could, for example, maybe you have like a romance storyline. And so you can make all of your Post-its in Miro pink. And, maybe you have like a health one, like I have a scoliosis plot. I make all of mine green. So it's like a really great way for my agent to kind of see the balancing of all the different storylines I have. And with Miro in particular, you can leave comments on it as well. And so my agent, whenever she had feedback or she thought something would go in a better place, she could easily move it around herself, as opposed to, kind of like sending it back and forth. Sometimes just in written word, it can be challenging sometimes. So that's really changed my process. I always work with plotboards moving forward, and I love it.
My agent's super editorial. So that's been.
I just realized I was still muted. You go first, and then I'm going to move on.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I was talking, but I saw your lips moving. I'm like, this is a weird ventriloquist act here.
What am I doing?
So my agent's really editorial, which I love. And we went on 2 rounds before we went on submission. So I'm a little bit answering the last question. So we did 2 rounds of revisions and decided, because she had my 2 projects, the middle grade and the YA, that we were going to try to debut with the middle grade, even though honestly, right now, y'all, middle grade is very, very difficult. There's fewer acquisitions in middle grade than anything right now. So that's a little tough. And we're on the 2nd round, which is we're in the 4th month. And generally what I've heard from folks is like checking in every 3 months about if you want to go a little wider with your submissions, or, doing more nudges, kind of on a every 3-month mark. So we're just getting into the 2nd round. And now I'm out with, that project is out to, I don't know, like 24 editors at this point. So hopefully I'll start hearing something back, because honestly, it's been crickets. But in getting to the next idea, she had the YA contemporary manuscript. So we've been working on that. However, I also still work with critique partners and beta readers. And I think that's a really important part of my process that I'm continuing with, because your agent isn't necessarily going to be the end all be all now for all of your writing. Like, you still have to be inspired and coming up with new ideas and getting them to a point where, you could actually bring them to fruition. So for me, I've been working with a beta reader on that YA contemporary, while also drafting and getting critique feedback from my critique group on a YA thriller. And my agent, again, she's like, sure, try it. Like, try everything, right? And then and because she works in all of the different age groups and genres, like, she is happy to have conversations about which one should be next, which, what things she thinks are selling right now. When she's having conversations with editors, what are they talking about wanting to acquire? But keeping your agent informed is really important, because then when they're pitching you, when they take, what your query package was, remix it. Like, she rewrote my bio, which was so interesting because I've never had another person write my bio for me. And also a totally different synopsis of the book. Which was interesting to see it from her perspective. And I loved it. And it felt real finally, because it like really felt like back of jacket copy. She knew, okay, if we're pitching this middle grade, I know that this editor also would be interested in the YA contemporary and the other things that you could, once you get in with someone, have that conversation about, okay, what's the next sale? What's the next thing? So having a more global picture of all of the things that you're interested in writing and interested in potentially selling is really important for your agent to know. So keeping those lines of communication open, I think, is really important. Another thing that someone said about auctions is I've heard not just, right, that you have your one shot at the imprint, but that if you have two imprints that are in the same publishing house, they often won't bid against each other. Some publishing houses have, this idea that they won't bid against each other. So even if it's two different imprints, sometimes you're actually just having one shot at that publisher too. So I know that's not necessarily what folks want to hear, but I think it's better to know the reality. So that was another thing that I heard recently.
Okay. I don't know how to move the question from the place to the other place, but Sarah just asked, what's something you didn't know about publishing that you wish you had known earlier in your journey? I feel like we're all going to have like the exact same answer to this guy. Marina.
I think we already mentioned it, but one of the things that really surprised me was that you only have one shot with each imprint. And I wish that I'd known that sooner. I guess also like related to that, especially with adult fantasy and sci-fi. So how many editors and how many imprints there are really depends on your field. And adult fantasy and sci-fi are one of the smaller ones. So there might really be only like 8 to 12 editors that you can go out to. And that's kind of it. So maybe I'm not sure. I wished I know that earlier, actually. But I think it's just good to know as much information as you can, right?
Yeah, I'm going to also piggyback on that and say, like, I didn't realize how hard it was, honestly. I think that writing is such a personal thing that I was like, I believe in my book. And sometimes that's not how this career works. Most of the time, that's not how this career works. This career is really difficult. And I would say it's like 99% total luck because your book is great. And so is everybody else's, And so whoever has a book picked up, it's like, congratulations to that. Like, that's amazing because there are very few books that really get picked up. So you have to wrap your head around the fact that this is tough. This is a really tough career to have. It doesn't feel fair. None of it is fair. Like the rules are totally made up. Nothing makes sense. Like why would I not be allowed to pitch another editor at the same imprint? Why are some agencies a no from one is a no from all? Like it doesn't seem to make sense. And then you have the timeline thing, which has gotten much, much longer and much more difficult for the writer who's freelancing this work. So I'm just going to put that out there. But also do it because it's so rewarding. Okay.
Yeah, I think one other thing to add on to mine with slightly more positive spin. I mentioned that I had started querying with like literary fiction way back when I first started. And I think one of the things that I had wished I had known is that it's really just important to do what you love. Because I kind of acquired this idea that like literary fiction was the only like real writing and that was what I had to do. And I didn't really start enjoying writing again until I moved back to fantasy. So like there's no genre that's better than another or like that's more worthy than another. So you're not going to get a lot of reward from publishing itself. So just finding the things about the actual writing that reward you and make you happy is probably the most important part.
Yeah, mine was, I think, kind of related to that. I say this as a joke a lot. I said this like slightly earlier as well. But one thing that I wish I had known about publishing is I always like thought deadline was like a thing that was like I would see authors like on Twitter or whatever being like, oh, I'm on deadline on hiatus. And I always thought it was like a kind of like mystical thing that like they were on and it was like a really big deal they were on deadline. And now looking back, like understanding that you're literally on deadline all of the time, or at least I feel like I'm on deadline all the time. And so to Marina's point, I feel like because I'm always on deadline, you really need to be able to protect your peace. Like you need to be working on things that you actually enjoy. Like if you don't, you will always feel like you're running on a hamster wheel because there's always something you could be doing. There's always a deadline you need to meet. If it's not like finishing your next book to send to your agent or finishing your dev edits to send to your editor, which is what I'm supposed to be doing now, there's always a thing that you're supposed to be doing. And so you really need to like take a step back and like make sure that you're working on things that you're enjoying and that you're enjoying the process of being a writer. Or like, well, I wouldn't even say that because sometimes I'm like, do I like writing? But like overall, I feel like you need to just really protect your peace and make sure you're working on things that you enjoy, or else it's not going to be enjoyable. Like you will just constantly be working yourself to the bone. So that's something I wish I'd known.
Yeah, for me, one thing I wasn't expecting was how much health plays a huge role in what you do. I mean, you kind of always know it until it hits you like a brick. But basically, especially for me, you know, I work a full-time job on top of doing this. And, you know, it's like when you're an author, illustrator, you work a lot with your hands. It's like, yes, you're typing your book, you're illustrating your book. My day job is also, I do coding. So it's like I'm typing a lot throughout the day. And I'll be honest, like it's really triggered, you know, repetitive strain injuries have like popped up. And, you know, I have like scoliosis and a few more health things. And so I've really had to be cognizant of carving out time in my schedule to work out and to also like just stretch. Because if I don't, it's like my body isn't going to be good enough for me to like type for hours on end or to be able to illustrate. And, you know, it's not just, you know, what's your body doing, it's also your mental health, just making sure you're in a good space, you have the support that you need. You know, when I first started this publishing journey, I was with somebody who wasn't very supportive, and that definitely was very challenging for me because it was like whenever I was writing, you know, it was like, oh, well, you're not spending time with me. And now that I have a partner who's super supportive and stuff, it's like night and day. You know, I just feel like I have the support. It's a lot easier to do what I love. And so just make sure that you know, consider not only like your physical health, but also your mental health, because it does get challenging, especially when more people are seeing you and your work.
Okay, we have to move on to the next question. I'm very sorry, because I think we could talk about this question forever. I think we should do the other Sarah. Can anyone speak to balancing writing and a day job?
Really quick. Hi, Sarah. Sarah's my mentee. So hi, Sarah. Sorry, I haven't scheduled a call yet. I'm still on deadline.
Deadline forever.
Which is also my answer to this is it's very hard because that is, so I've been on deadline for, like I said, ever. And I actually am, my official deadline for this was February 1st. And I had to email my editor and ask for an extension because I just got a new day job, which took up a lot of time. And honestly, I think that I mentioned earlier that I wrote the like kind of main draft of the book that is going to become my debut during lockdown when I didn't have a job. I mean, you couldn't do anything. And I can promise you it was much easier, at least for me being single with no kids. Like it was much easier for me to do that in that environment than it is now with a full-time job and responsibilities outside of it. And what it comes down to for me is really just being very diligent with my time and also being going back to protecting your peace, prioritizing things. Like when I'm on deadline, which is all of the time, but when I'm actually like actively about to turn in a draft, I have to just be really strict with my friends who they understand like, hey, when it's close to when my book is due, I'm probably not going to hang out as much. Or if you want to see me, you might have to meet me at a coffee shop where I'll be working on edits. Like, I think it's really about prioritizing things when you get to that point and understanding that you can't have everything all at the same time. I do kind of think you can have everything that you personally want in life, but it's just prioritizing what is the most important at any given time. That's a little like woo-woo, but that's my thoughts.
I was going to reference, if anybody remembered, I feel like in undergrad there was that like Venn diagram where it's like social life, eating healthy, exercise, hobbies, schoolwork, all that stuff. And you can only like pick two. To that note of prioritizing, that is definitely true, right? And For me, there is a lot of like privilege in the sense of, for example, like my partner is the primary cook. He takes on a lot of like household labor when I don't have that energy to, and so that helps me out a lot. I know not everybody is in a position like that. And again, I don't have kids, for example, right? And so if I had kids, that would be another factor. Slash, if I did have kids and we could afford, or having childcare or had family around, that would be another variable. So I think prioritizing things and making time when you can, but also learning to set boundaries and trying your best to set boundaries with people in your family, because I think writers often fall into this situation where other people don't take it seriously. Like they think it's a side gig. So I've had friends with like in-laws who are like, oh, you can just do this, right? They're like, no, I'm doing my job, and they don't take it seriously. So being ready, I guess, to set those boundaries and being very clear with folks, like this isn't just some fun hobby, like I need to do this. And so hopefully you're in a situation where your relationships are with people who understand that. But that is a conflict I didn't necessarily expect to come into prior to undergoing this journey.
One thing I'll add to that too, just about how to have those boundary talks, or at least something. I don't think this is. I'm gonna preface this. I don't know if this is good advice. However, I noticed after I got my book deal, people took it a lot more seriously when I was like, "Hey, I need to I need this time to focus on this." But also outside of people who are like basically people on this call who are know about publishing or interested in publishing, no one knows anything about publishing. Like the average person on the street has no idea how books are made, no idea anything about it. So when you approach those conversations for anyone outside of publishing, you can approach it as if there's money on the line. This is like you said, this is a job. And if you come into that conversation like that, people will respect it because they genuinely have no idea. And so don't feel like you have to have something in your back pocket, oh, my agent needs this, or my editor needs this. You treating it seriously, people will respect it. If you really approach it as this is a job, this is something that I need to I need this dedicated time to be able to work on my projects.
Rosalind is our life coach now. And
it's
and also our therapist. I'm going to move to a question that was added in the mentee chat, I believe. And the question is, what made you want to become a mentor in the first place? Somebody who hasn't spoken in some time. I'm going to call on somebody. I feel like a teacher. What is going on?
Yeah.
Eunice.
I can speak.
I can go. For
Marina.
I wanted to be a mentor because I feel like I got a lot of help along the way. So I applied to a lot of mentee programs when I was querying, and I never actually got into any of them. But I still got a lot of advice and help from the mentors. So even though I wasn't officially mentored, there were some of them who I would ping querying questions off of, help, is this an agency that I should approach, and things like that. And I'm also I've been a teacher for a number of years, so I like teaching as well. But basically, I just wanted to feel like I was giving back, because I think other writers really aren't your competition, and I wanted to be able to help other people up the ladder.
Yeah, I would also say my reasons were similar, in which from my own experience working in an industry, and also from coming at from the side of the writer's perspective, this is not an industry that's really opaque, really. And so there's only so much you can read about online, I feel, but mentorship, I felt, would be a really good way for me to kind of give back to community, because definitely for me, I think one benefit for me was I was able to kind of form a community, have my own community of writers, pretty early on, early in the career trenches. And that community and my writer friends have been an invaluable resource. And I know not everyone has that. And so it's important to kind of form those connections and have a sense of community. And so, yeah.
I think similar to what other folks have said, I really believe in lifting as you climb. And even if you're one rung ahead, you have a lot to pass on. I also feel a lot of times these relationships, it's such a give and take. I learn so much more than I teach a lot of the times. And like Marina was saying, I've also taught middle schoolers and high schoolers, and that was such a great experience for me. I've been a camp counselor, I've run different programs, and I really missed having that sort of connection. And it really inspires me and fills my bucket up. I'll also say that, I've had some really positive mentorship, experiences on both ends in my nonprofit and marketing career. And honestly, the last mentorship I had, and this stays here, was so bad when I was the mentee that I was like, clearly we have to do this better. And I feel like a big part of Roundtable Mentor is a lot of us have experienced things that were not ideal and we want to do it better, right? Like we would like to be able to model what we'd like to see out there in the world. And so all of this transparency, all of this support, all of these resources, our openness, and I'll speak for myself, is really coming from a place of, I wish I had this. I did not have a writing community when I first started. I didn't know what I was doing. I read a lot online. I did a lot of research, but I literally did not have anybody holding my hand or helping me in any way. And I wish I had. And so that was a big, impetus for me to want to be involved in something like this. So that's basically it, lifting as you climb.
Everybody gave very good answers. I don't think that there's any follow on because those are all perfect. So another question that was asked in the Discord was, what's your method of tackling edit letters? How do you go about it? I'm going to just start this one off because I experience grave panic every time I receive an edit letter. I go into like full existential spiral. I'm like, oh my God, this book is bad, right? And I'm currently receiving my MFA. And God willing, I will graduate this summer. And what has happened over the course of my writing career and my MFA program is that I've learned to take critique without having it, like, I still have an existential crisis, I won't lie to you, but I don't have an externalized existential crisis, and it only takes a very short amount of time for me to travel from, oh my God, my book is bad, to what work needs to be done to make this book good. So speaking personally, what I do is I read it, I sit with it, I put it away. I walk away for maybe a day or two, and then I come back and I read it again, and I'm like, all right, what are the things inside of this edit letter? What is this edit letter saying? And I try and boil it down to like a couple of good bullet points. And then I read my book with those in mind, and I start like just thinking like, okay, this is definitely where I fell down, and the edit letter caught that. That's great, because at least we have a clear understanding of the direction that I need to go in, right? And typically after I've read through my manuscript with my edit letter in mind, then I have like a slightly longer list where I can actually like put page numbers and be like, these are the things that I need to address. And from there, you can really start editing. And that's kind of like the fun stuff, that's like, you have identified the parts of your manuscript that need work. And that's great, because most people don't even get that far, right? Most people are like, this is a done book. And it's not. I always love/hate it when I get an edit letter, because I'm like, I thought I was done. But then I realize like, I'm not done. And that's really cool. I get to stay here a little bit longer and make it better. So I would say like, definitely like digest your edit letter. You do not need to start immediately editing. I think that's something that people do, and I don't recommend that, because then you're coming from an emotional place. I would say like really like sit with the work. That sounds very woo-woo, but it's also true. It's such a like internal access point, you're working on something really personal. So yeah, I'm going to stop talking, but that's what I would do.
I think my process looks very similar to yours. The one thing that I'll add is that when I think because I'm like a very emotional person, when I get my first edit letter, and again, as I've found going through the publishing process, every edit letter ends up like, it gets longer and longer. Like when I started out with like, having like trading manuscripts with my friends and stuff, it'd be like maybe like a couple paragraphs. Then it was like a couple pages for my agent. Now I'm up to like 7 to 10 pages in edit letter. Like you just kind of get used to it after a while. But the one thing that I will say is whenever I get my edit letter, the first thing I do, I'm like the same. I read it and then like put it away and digest it. But when I read it, I also make sure to highlight the positive things they say about your book, because something I find is when I read an edit letter, like the nice things they say are kind of heard in like a whisper, and then the like critiques are like screams. And so I feel like when I like, I'll read it, and if I just put it away, all I'll remember is all the things I didn't like about it. And I won't remember like the beginning and the end where they're like, I really liked all this stuff about it. I really enjoyed reading it, like all the nice things. And so I make sure to highlight that stuff. So then when I go back and like reread it and I start to do more of the bulleting, that kind of stuff, I can clearly see like, oh, they did like it. They just have improvements on it, which is understandable because that is literally what I signed up for. And then I'm also a Notion girly. I don't know if anyone knows what Notion is. I am a huge Notion person. I have forced it upon everyone in this mentorship. But I also created like a whole dashboard spreadsheet thing for like how I organize my edits, which I can like post the like template for that in the Discord if people want to use it. I am obsessed with Notion. It helps me to like organize all of my thoughts because especially like I'm currently editing a mystery. So like everything I changes quite literally every single interaction with everyone. So it gets very complicated very quickly. And so that like having like a very clear like spreadsheet where it's like, I know exactly where everything goes and how like one change affects all the other chapters makes it a lot easier to like actually implement the edits when it becomes time.
You know, at the risk of like cutting off amazing answers, feel free, mentors, also to like stick it in the chat if you have other answers. I just want to make sure we get through like a couple more because we only have 10 minutes left. We're not even going to get to writing sprints. I am so sorry if you came here for writing sprints. Let's see. This question like deeply affects me on like a personal level, but also like makes me laugh. How long did it take you to go from your first draft to having your book published? Forever. I'm sorry. Somebody else answer this because also
have I done that yet? I just don't know. Like I don't know when that happens.
This isn't, I mean, actually, I think this is actually a really cool question because I think it demonstrates how little information there is out there on how publishing actually works, right? Like, what is a first draft? I'm not really sure. Is it when I write my pitch letter? Is it when I have an outline? Is it when I have a bare bones draft? Is the first draft actually the thing that I'm working on with my editor? I don't know. Forever. Somebody else say something about this.
I can give some hypothetical years. We're pretending these are not real years, let's say, for the sake of I'm not saying anything that I'm not supposed to say. Hypothetically, I may have written the first draft of a book in early 2022, and that book might be published in 2025. Some other numbers, I have another book that I'm currently revising that I wrote in 2020. And I'm revising it for what feels like the 100th time to go on submission. So, I mean, generally, I think you would probably be published about like 18 months to 24 months after you have a book deal offer. So I think the timeline varies a bit, but that's kind of roughly where it's at. It varies.
Which my book got bumped, so I definitely varies. It's a very publishing. If there's one thing that is consistent about it, it's that it's very inconsistent. That is the only thing.
And not to add to the inconsistency, but another hypothetical situation is if you were to sell on proposal and the book is not yet written, then first draft to published will be much shorter. So that's like 1.5 years or a year. So it really does depend. Which again, going in, you should be mindful, like if you're a very slow writer, knowing that maybe selling a proposal isn't for you and vice versa.
As somebody who also sold on proposal, but who had a book written that then needed to be completely rewritten to the proposal contents, I guess I sold last November, and then my book is coming out in fall 2025. So 1.5 years. But keep in mind that I'd already written a book that I'd rewritten, but my current editor had the first version of the book. So, and that book I wrote like 2 years ago. So, the timelines are very inconsistent in publishing. I will agree with Rosalind. There's no such thing as a timeline. And I would like throw it out. I would just say like, Your book is going to happen on the timeline that it happens. That's it. There's no like, I'm very sorry, as somebody who operates on a schedule and who needs like a to-do list every day to function. That's not what I wanted to hear, but that's like my lesson from publishing for myself and the universe is that like, there's nothing I can do to muscle it to go faster. It just does whatever it does. And there's nothing I can do. And I hate it, but here I am. So, let's see.
I have an answer on the graphic novel end, if that's okay.
Yes, do it.
Awesome. So graphic novels are weird. I actually haven't completed a first draft yet, and I sold my project last year. So just, yeah, it's a weird thing. Just because with graphic novels, again, you don't have to have it finished, and then you got to complete the manuscript. And once that's done, then you do thumbnails, which are kind of like sketches of what everything will look like. Then you got to do inks, then you do color, and then you put like the text and stuff on the screen. So it's just a very long process. So who knows when I'll have my first draft done, but if all goes well, hopefully it'll be out in 2027. So yeah.
I just want to circle us back around to a question I don't believe we answered. What are some red flags besides not being able to sell the book to look for when talking to agents' other clients? This is a really important question. Anybody want to go toe-to-toe with this guy?
I would say for me, speaking to the other clients, I got a better idea of communication style, and that's something that's really important to understand. I think, Taylor, you were talking about like, you know, really wanting to be on video, and that was important to you. For me, I guess I just want to know what's expected of me. Like, is it going to be a person who gets back to me immediately? Do they like text messaging? Do they not? Do they like to be on the phone? How long am I going to wait for responses? Do I feel comfortable talking to this person about, deadlines that I want to impose, right? Like, I would like you to have this back to me, right? Because it's a two-way street by such and such a time, or I need to know, like where things are sort of in the pipeline. So getting to understand that communication style, I think, is really important. The agent that I have actually takes a really long time to get back to me because I've learned, and I heard from the other, the other folks who are represented, that she wants to be as thorough as possible. And she's a very deep thinker, and she wants to answer every question that I put to her, if I email her something. So I've learned, like, ask one question, don't pile like 12 in there, or it'll take a little while to get, all the responses. So, it's really like how their communication style is. And if you feel like you can mesh with that, that was something that was really important, that I talked to the other, folks who were represented.
I was going to add, if you can, and I know we talked about some folks don't like phone calls, which is fine, but if you can talk to their clients on phone or Zoom, because essentially some folks are more comfortable being honest when it's not written down, right? It's not screenshotable. So you may get more honest answers from the clientele. In terms of subject, I think a good one to talk about, if they're willing, and it sounds kind of weird, is how the agent operates in moments of crises, right? They could be good crises or bad crises, right? When it's like a very high stress situation for the client, how does the agent operate? Do they feel supported? Because I think kind of it speaks to human relationships, right? At the worst, it can possibly be, how did this person behave and help you through something? And I think that helped me because I, talked to a lot of clients, and really it was like in a moment of crisis, they always felt like their agent was there. They did not feel like they were dropping the ball at all and not supporting them. So that was important for me to kind of figure out.
Okay, sorry guys, I'm going to cap this. We did almost 2 straight hours. So I just want to thank everybody for coming, first of all. And for our mentor team, who is so amazing, just the best humans. We couldn't ask for better people to work with. If you have more questions of us, please do put them somewhere in the mentee chat. We will find them and do our best to answer them, as always. And then I wanted to say just a quick word about genre-wide meetings. I know that's on the schedule. So we are looking at the 3rd or 4th week of March. We're trying to nail down dates that work best for everybody. It's tough because it's spring break time for kids if they have kids. So, but we are going to do that. And the way we are going to do that is people in whatever genre category, it doesn't matter the age group, we're all going to try and get on Zoom just to trade information so that we can kind of pool what we've learned in the first couple of months working with our mentors and mentees. And it goes really, truly like for us too, like we want to talk about what we have learned being mentors, because this is a unique position. And if it's taught me anything, it's that communication is key. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us. Rosalind, thank you for being and Hien, thank you for being my tech gurus, because I don't know what I'm doing. Yay, see you guys at the next live stream, okay? Bye.